Hey y'all, I'm Fifi.
And I'm Bear.
We are back with long form content, giving you some updates about what's really been going on the past 4 years.
Yeah.
I think we're making a official introduction or reintroduction. Currently, across all of our platforms, we're launching a new newsletter called Vantage Points, where we're just giving the tea about what's really been going on the past 4 years, really reflecting on our mission and our purpose and bringing it back and re-engaging in the way that we did when we started this whole thing 4 years ago.
Yeah, which started on YouTube, creating content. I had titties. That's wild. You know what I mean? I think we can't talk about why we started this without talking about lockdown. That moment for us, I mean, Fifi quit their very corporate job and moved into a nonprofit work in the Bronx that was really focused on Black and brown entrepreneurs. And I was a frontline worker, exhausted, overworked, not paid enough, all of those fun things. I was a healthcare worker at that, so working at a residential facility. So to say that our attention was being kind of pulled in the direction of things that were absolutely depleting is a understatement. And what lockdown presented to us was so many things. First of all, the collective acknowledgement and lack of gaslighting, at least in the very least, of we need to protect vulnerable people by staying inside and slowing down. What it revealed was the world can actually run a lot differently than we've been taught or conditioned to believe it has to run. That it does not have to be run on this basis of hustle, of capital, of any of these things, and that we can start creating, if we have the opportunity and the privilege, really, to create meaningful work. And we felt like, from our lens as queer, trans, Black, indigenous people of color, you being a child of immigrants, all of these elements of our story and being born and raised in this wild city lended itself to a voice that felt super important, to share and to start to create accessible space for others who identified with us. So that's really where this started. It was content creation. It was content creation that we really enjoyed making, that we felt was authentic, that spoke to every kind of component of our experience, our relationship, and yeah, they were just simpler times, and things started to expand.
It was a simpler time in the sense that we got to focus on health and wellness for the first time on a social global level, and people's safety mattered more than anything else. It felt like the only time I had ever lived through, heard about in history. It was an opportunity, and we went for it, and we shared our story while we were locked inside, and it just felt really important and significant. On our own accord, we started doing workshops. It was positive response from the content we were creating about relationships, non-monogamy,
sex
queerness.
positivity.
Yes, and we responded to that calling and started making offerings, and in that process, I went and I sought an external consultant that helped teach us a lot about who we don't want to be. So that was a hard lesson to learn when we began as coaches.
So we were coaches who hired a coach. That's what happened. And the industry is unregulated. So, we had some hard lessons learned within that kind of space, and it was a very different ideology than we had ever been. At least for me, I can actually speak for me personally, because Fifi sought this person out, and then I kind of started to work with them as well, and we were working with them together to really learn how to run a coaching business, run a coaching practice, and to get the right education so that we felt equipped to be working with people one-to-one. And there's so many things I can say about this experience. Obviously, not all bad. Terrible ending. However, this person really helped launch the idea that we could create something for ourselves and for the people that we care about, as opposed to kind of giving or working within institutions that didn't feed us or nourish us. The lockdown, again, gave us that opportunity to slow down and evaluate those things. And for me, it opened up a door of possibility. And at the same time, that coach kind of got caught up in the things that catch us, which is like capital and kind of ensuring that you're creating like a silo of people making a lot of money and paying you a lot of money, and it just kind of ended up being, if I'm being totally brash, a pyramid scheme.
It was a really hard lesson in vetting and in how to build community and choosing your allies.
Right. A lesson in discernment.
Yes. And getting cross references and really investigating folks and looking into who they've supported in the past, what they've endorsed, just what they're really about, and a lesson in not diving in too fast into things, even though it's a lesson that we've had to learn a number of times.
Right.
And I think that's just the nature of capitalism in general, is that there are going to be people out there for the dollar.
And self-interest.
Period. And knowing when there's real alignment with who you're choosing to put in your circle. That's just all that came out of that experience. And there was finally, luckily, one thing that kind of brought us back into track after we had to abruptly break things off with this coach.
Because we were paying this coach a lot of money.
We were financially recovering from that experience because of how honestly violent it was in terms of financial expectation. Brutalizing as that was, we recovered and we came out of it stronger as a unit, and we went back to what are we doing this for, what are we actually about, and we found a really great certification program that was the kind of teaching and professional training experience that actually launched our business into a different dimension, another level.
Yeah, so we went from this very kind of material, weird space of like the lavish, like individual coaching life that was very exclusive, and we find ourselves in a very affordable program called Urban Tantra. It really opened doors, not just on a professional level, but Fifi and I met in 12-step. Like, there is a kind of spiritual hunger that we're constantly seeking, and again, individual coaches can really placate on that or use that to their advantage. And in this space, it was a community space. It was one in which marginalized people were prioritized and having seats and having space to speak and having space to talk from their point of view. So this centered Black people, this centered trans people, this centered neurodivergence and different abilities, and this centered bigger bodied people. And I mean, felt like 7 years of trauma therapy in 7 days.
Yeah.
And because it was so rooted in the body and authenticity, and it wasn't perfect. There were social interactions that weren't perfect, and there were so many, like, having to check our privilege, having to realize, like, when we should be speaking and it was sticky and at times. And that realness, that ability to have hard conversations, to call people in, to create boundaries when we had enough of feeling all day. You know, there was so much messiness and authenticity and realness, and Tantra from the lens of someone who also was from New York City, who used it largely to help men dying of AIDS connect in different ways. So it meant so much to be there, because she started this from a place of helping the most vulnerable at the time, and then we kind of got to be in her presence amongst Black, brown, trans people. Like, it was just really beautiful, and it dropped us into our bodies and kind of the reality of the work we're doing. Whereas, you know, the coaching world was like lavish and in the head and belief work, and and this work really was like, what is in our bodies? What are we carrying in our bodies? What do our bodies face on a day-to-day basis? And what kind of bodies do we inhibit that make us more at risk of certain things? Like, we're talking about systemic oppression. We're talking about real shit that impacts anyone's ability to connect with themselves and the world around them. And I think once we started creating from that lens, we really started to see results in our clients and even in our own kind of relationship in life.
That was a pivotal moment. That was really when we became embodiment coaches. Something cracked open in us about how we could approach intimacy and how we could invite other people to approach intimacy. I think, the distinction really is, rather than coming from a very prescriptive, templative, theoretical lens, one that was kind of more psychology heavy, to one that is really in the body and reconnecting to roots and practices that resonate on a
Sacred.
spirit level,
Yeah.
is more of what we're about, and how we've tried to move from since then, even in the curation and creation of event spaces that we've been doing within the past year that have been very pleasure focused. The certification allowed us to combine that with learning. So we created play spaces that were also learning and exploratory spaces. We started a series called Intimacy Play Lab that is that combination of going through exercises that connect us more with our vulnerability and with our playfulness, to then be able to enter an adult space with the energy of no assumptions, and kind of really peeling off the layers of who we think we are and who we think we have to be in these spaces and when we enter intimacy. So those conversations are definitely the kinds that we want to keep having. I think we just don't need the extra stress of like holding big groups of people. We
Especially
might,
in COVID cautiousness and creating more accessible spaces.
going along with it, all that we've been saying too about creating intentionality, and intentionality can't really be all at once at the massive scale all the time. You know, I think it'd be really cool if collectively the whole earth got on the same page about something, and I mean that will get some results, but you know, I think because of all of our context and all of the energy and information and stimulation that we all get from so many different directions, to really actually ground all together, it requires so much collective agreeing. It is possible, and I think that's what we're working on, and that's kind of what we're here to invite you all to do with us, whether you're participating with us in session format as coaching clients or small groups, and simply through content. Like basically that this is the invitation, if this is one of the only ways you engage with us, to take that with you and to ask these questions for yourself as well,
to like encompass, you know, everything that we've learned over these past 4 years, from the coach to urban tantra to my transition to smaller events to bigger events to just coaching, the focus, and ultimately the way that we treat each other on the day-to-day, the way that we direct our attention and what we prioritize in relationships really does have an impact. Because, you know, like when we think about all the things we've been taught about relationships within this empire, all of them are ones that provide for the empire, right? So that hyperfixation on romance, the nuclear family, all of these things are things that feed the machine. And when we reimagine our relationships and the way that we relate to each other, we get to reimagine a new world. And I think Intimacy Play Lab, first of all, encompassed what we took from Urban Tantra, but it also, that space itself, did this high-level thing of teaching people one-to-one how to treat each other, and also we're in a community, like how are we engaging and how are we treating each other in this like kind of sensual space that's pleasure-focused but not so much hedonistic.
sensual, spiritual.
So we're reconnecting to our spirituality as people, especially as black and brown people, as trans people, as New Yorkers. You know, there's so much that we get out of being more grounded in our mission, and we hope that what it reflects is offerings that speak to you, or content that speaks to you, that really does talk to an authentic part of, you know, the people who watch us, the people who come to our events, or who wonder about working with us.
We are here. We will be back on the channel. Sign up for newsletters, subscribe, follow, etc., etc., and stay tuned for more.
Mwah.
Thanks for watching.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.